Well, good morning. Let's begin as we always do by taking a few breaths. So if you will, breathe in and let go. Take another deep breath in and let it go. One more deep breath. Breathe in and let go. And so we're in a new month. As I mentioned, we're also in a new season. In our year of inner and outer permaculture, we're working our way through the principles of regenerative agriculture, also known as permaculture. Last month, our whole month's conversation was about this idea of observe and interact as the fundamental principle. This month, all throughout the month of February, the topic we are going to be discussing is use and value diversity. And in context to agriculture, the world that we live in programs us for sameness. We grow one crop in rows, all the products should look the same, fit in a little category. And yet that's not how nature works. That's not how human society works. And so this month we're going to be exploring this idea of use and value diversity. And beautifully, we just passed the Chinese Lunar New Year, and February is also Black History Month. And so there are many, many, many layers on which we can talk about this theme as we go through the course of the month. And one of the things that we've been doing here as the season, the turn of the wheel changes, is, if you remember, around Halloween, we had our Dia de los Muertos ceremony that Marianne shared with us a little bit about. And as we move through the wheel of the year, part of what we want to do is have some cultural observations and some opportunities for education. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion team here, which includes Ron and Marianne, Amy, Jason, myself, Reverend Tamara. And our sort of core focus with that group is three things. We want to acknowledge, and we brought forth our land acknowledgement and some of the things we've been doing here. The second piece is educate, that a big piece of what we need to do in order to be a truly more diverse, welcoming, open, and inclusive community, and also welcoming and inclusive people in the world, is educate ourselves. And then the third piece of that is outreach or service. And so Amy Chen is going to come up here, and she, how many of you were here at the Bao Chiaozi we had on Friday night? So a bunch of us got to learn from Amy's mother how to make traditional Chinese dumplings, which I now know how to make from scratch. Thank you very much. It was a lovely time of being with Amy and her mother, whose name I keep forgetting, but you'll tell us, I know that. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to have gathered in that community way around food and conversation. And so I'm going to invite Amy up, and she's going to talk to us about Chinese New Year and some history for all of us. So let's welcome Amy Chen.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Chen. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a little speech for you today, and also a poem. And I just want to preface this by saying that the speech part, it might be a little new and unusual and a little uncomfortable for some people, probably not for everybody, definitely not. But then after the discomfort, we'll go into the poem, which will feel better again. So kind of like life, we're going on a journey, a little roller coaster. So here we go. And thank you for joining me. My ancestors come from Europe and from China. My father, I don't know his background so well. He has passed, and so have my grandfather and grandmother on his side. I know I am part Irish, part Anglo-Saxon. My grandmother's maiden name was Ballard. My grandfather's was Mills. My father was an all-American kind of guy. He raised me, actually, and so I grew up mostly surrounded by white people. White hippies, to be exact. I call it being raised by wolves. Benevolent wolves. My mother's family came from north of Nanking, from Sichuan, China. When Japan invaded, they fled to Chongqing, where my mother was born. Later, the family would move to Taiwan as the communists took over the mainland. Ballard, Chen, Mills, Wang. These are my ancestors. I am all mixed up. Looking mostly Chinese or sometimes native or something else, being raised by a single father, moving every 3 to 5 years to a new school, a new state, I think I have always felt like an outsider in this nation. On my birth certificate, my mother's race is listed as yellow. I wonder what that means. Are only the Chinese yellow, or is all of Asia yellow? So like I say, I am white and also yellow. A pale, buttery sunrise color, maybe. Just before the election of 2020, as I was tracking the hate crimes rising against Chinese and other Asians, yellows who look Chinese, and as our last president mocked the Kung flu at rallies, my husband and I took his motorboat to Angel Island. There I saw the barracks for Chinese immigrants, cramped with a tiny yard and crammed full of bunk beds. And I saw the barracks for the Europeans, which were spacious and sunny, with a much bigger yard for sports and fresh air. We have a slide. I took a picture. There you can see Angel Island. This may sound surprising, but I hadn't known about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, when Chinese, particularly manual laborers, became the first ethnicity and nationality to be specifically excluded from immigrating to the U.S. until the Trump Muslim ban. I learned all of this as I was learning about systemic racism against blacks in the U.S. more deeply, reading books and watching films, connecting the dots that have led us to this day and the white lash we see now across the nation. In the spring of 2021, just last year, a white man, a purported Christian, took his automatic rifle and opened fire on 3 massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia, killing 6 Asian women, a white man, and a white woman. He blamed them for his own sins. The police arrested him without bruising him, without hurting him, without tackling him even to the ground. The official spokesperson for the Atlanta Area Sheriff's Office, Jay Baker, explained the man had had a very bad day. I wonder how Mr. Baker might have described the day of the 8 who were shot and killed. It was discovered later that Baker had been promoting T-shirts on Facebook blaming the coronavirus on the Chinese. This person, serving in a position of great authority and power, has still not been fired. I tell this story because it was this massacre in Georgia that galvanized the Asian American community here in Santa Cruz. Calls went out, a social media group was organized, and there were suddenly many meetings. We started to get it together to test out our voices. And I realized that part of our ethos as a culture here in the States is to keep our heads down, to not make a fuss, maybe because we have been banned before or killed or lynched, our villages burned to the ground. If we are Japanese, we have been rounded up, sent to camps, our homes and businesses lost forever. If we are Korean, if we are Filipino, if we are Indian, we can all tell stories. This time is about when I learned about the Chinese fishing village in Pacific Grove, which was burned to the ground like many others in California at the time in 1906. There's a picture of it on the bottom right. A crowd of white people stood and cheered and then looted the village for valuables. Just 1 year before this, the Pacific Grove community launched the Feast of Lanterns, a festival that would morph to become a week in length and during which Chinese lanterns are set out everywhere on porches and storefronts, and in which typically white teenage girls compete to become part of the royal court, donning Chinese outfits and to enact a play together as Chinese characters. We can go to the next slide. In the last half dozen years, a Chinese woman, a descendant of the people who lived in the Chinese fishing village at Point Alones in Pacific Grove, started showing up at the board meetings for the feast. She was polite. She believed in change with kindness. Her name was Jerry Lo Sabado, and at first, all she asked was if people could stop booing the Chinese father in the play, played by a white man. Stop throwing things at him. She wondered out loud about the Chinese fishing village and where the Chinese in the area, she wondered out loud about the Chinese fishing village where the Chinese in the area had founded Monterey Bay's fishing industry and had started fishing squid there, and who had been burned out of their village and forgotten. Could we think of them, maybe? She was met with no response, year after year. Finally, Jerry started an annual walk of remembrance to memorialize the fishing village. But this was not part of the Feast of Lanterns, which continued, just as it had always done, up until 2019. In 2020, COVID shut the feast down. And now, here we are. Next slide, please. I had Jerry on a radio show with me just last spring. After a large vigil the Asian American community organized for victims of the Georgia murders. I called it Feast of Burden. Jerry was joined by younger Asian activists. Many people by now, Asian, white, and otherwise, were talking about ending or radically changing the beloved Feast of Lanterns festival, and pushback was enormous and angry. Sometimes people don't see things, and they don't seek to understand. If a bully pushes a child to the ground and then takes their doll away and then parades up and down the schoolyard holding the doll aloft like a favorite new toy, how does this make the bully look? How does this make the child feel? What does this mean? Next slide, please. This slide shows the Chinatowns and some of the Chinese who lived in Santa Cruz during the time that Duncan McPherson organized the Caucasian Society and published his opinions about the Chinese in his newspaper, the Santa Cruz Sentinel. The Chinese are unmitigated curse to this state, he wrote. They have done 1,000 times more evil than good. On my radio show, Jerry expressed how fearful she was going to her first feast board meetings, but now she was just very tired. She was glad younger people were getting involved. And just a few months after this show, Jerry Lo Sabado passed away. She was a kind, persistent, and courageous agent of change for her generation. Those of us who helped to organize the vigil for Asian victims of white supremacy, insecurity, and confusion were mostly younger than Jerry. Next slide. We have been inspired by the reclamation of our true national history by Black, Indigenous, and Brown people, how we helped to build this country, the water systems in Pacific Grove, and even 17 Mile Drive, how much we have been a part of it all, even though some have tried to erase us, and even though we do not hear and see our histories told. Now, in the midst of the Chinese celebration of the Lunar New Year, it is time for new beginnings, according to this ancient agricultural calendar. And it is time for new leadership, for justice, for remembering, and for celebrating. At this time of year, families clean their homes, eat oranges, and cook special foods. We celebrate elders and children alike. This year is the year of the tiger. Tigers are vigorous and ambitious, daring and courageous, with a sense of justice and a commitment to help others for the greater good. We can honor the spirit of the tiger this new year and at the same time, and according to tradition, honor our ancestors of all colors, those who were burned out, excluded, and forgotten, those who were erased, and those, like Jerry, who stepped forward to make a way for others to follow. Okay, here's the poem. Here's the good part. This poem, actually, a friend of mine said you should enter this poetry contest. There's like a cash prize, and it was sponsored by like a paint company. So it was about like you need to include all these colors in your poem. There should be lots of colors. So I was really happy to hear True Colors as the song right before this. And so this poem is called Bananas. We eat a lot of bananas around here, with reams of teens in and out of this house. Bananas are yellow on the outside, white on the inside. And you could say that about me from an angle. Yet I do rather seem to me mottled and freckled, watermelon, peach, pink and tan, tawny, a motley mix-up of Asian, Anglo, Irish. My father a hippie and my mother who lost me to him when I was 3. She is Chinese, and she has loved me invisibly through distance, across time and space. So yellow, Dijon, honey, sunbeam, did not go untended nor undefended. And she fed me colors over summers and holidays, and on the steamy streets of Taiwan, sweet alabaster rice balls, soft little moons full of liquid charcoal, sesame gold, and snowy lacy white shave ice with creamy plum-colored red bean and onyx grass jelly, wriggling, shining, sticky donza of soy brown rice wrapped tight in cooked bamboo leaves of umber and green, and smashed cucumbers of emerald and white, so bright. I lay claim to Asian, having ingested these foods for decades now. I will be Chinese. Because my brothers and sisters, yellow, black, red, brown, canary, sable, scarlet, carob, the rainbow. Because this boulder we have rolled up this goddamn mountain of slippery and dangerous slopes, rocky terrain and dashed hopes. Well, it is almost at the top. But some humorless lunatics keep trying to force it back down. And it will take all our efforts, friends, a rainbow coalition, if you will, to get to that top. We have cheerleaders. If you are white, adopt a color, befriend a hue. We do this, all of us, for the red, white, and blue. A deeper dream of color as beauty, as necessary, as complete and completion. Here is my secret, friends. I am not actually white on the inside. No, I am like you, something more translucent and fine, something that moves and shines, something the same as that in you. I know this. You know this too. And this is the whole point. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Can we just say thank you again? I'm so incredibly grateful to have a space where we can work on educating ourselves. For those of you who may not know me, I am Rev Elisha Christopher. I'm the spiritual director here. I use they, them pronouns, and my ancestors come from, on my father's side, from Ireland and Scotland, and on my mother's side, from Austria and Holland, and they were Jewish on my mom's side. Oh, you didn't know that. Hey, my people out there. So I just want to speak for just a few minutes about this month's theme of use and value diversity. Because I have spent a lot of time moving around the country, participating in a lot of spiritual communities. And I find it odd that I've often found myself surrounded by a lot of very spiritual, well-meaning white people who say at the beginning of their service, we're a diverse and inclusive community. And I look around, and it's like, really? and then we live in this country, which is the most diverse place on earth. And if you look at the history of this nation, we have used diversity in very disturbing ways. We have the history of slavery. We have the Chinese Exclusion Act. You know, this country was built on the backs of people of color. Yes. And so we have this theme that tells us to use and value diversity. We can't just say we value diversity and then not actually do anything about it. And we can't continue to live in a culture that uses diversity but does not value the people. And so what I want us to do this month as we explore this theme of use and value diversity is, what does it truly look like for us to do this in every level of our existence? What does it look like to truly build a culture here where we recognize the beauty of the true colors that come together to make the tapestry of who we are? And how do we be that out in the world? And I believe that that goes everywhere from the choices and votes and purchases that we make all the way down to what we eat. That the programming is strong and that the feedback loops that are telling us about who we are surrounding us all the time. And I've been having this thought about what does it mean to balance. There's a difference. I'm going to back up. The difference between what I'm about to say here. That we often talk about the danger of cultural appropriation, of taking on another culture that isn't yours, stealing a piece of it, right? Amy, I think, spoke a little bit about the celebration of lanterns. That's a whole lot of white people kind of absorbing someone else's culture and without permission, really, right? And I remember many years ago, Reverend Grace went to a Vipassana retreat, and she came back and was telling me about agreements that you make there. And one of the agreements is don't steal from anybody. But the way that it's worded was, do not take that which is not given. Right? And I think that's what cultural appropriation is. Cultural appropriation is when we take something from another culture that is not ours and just use it without value, without context, without history, without mythology, because all of these things are important. And I think the thing that is the antidote or the counter to cultural appropriation is cultural appreciation, which is what I think we're trying to do here. You know, Amy came to me and said, I'd like to offer some information and bring our community into my family's tradition of Chinese New Year. I would not have done this if someone in this community didn't want to bring it forward from their own heritage, because that would be cultural appropriation. But what we're seeking to do is to educate ourselves, to see deeper into the lens of who is here and who surrounds us and who we share this world with. You know, and as you may have noticed in the last number of months, we're having people on stage introduce their name and their pronouns and their ancestry. Because really, each one of us comes with a fractal of overlapping lenses that make us who we are, that build the perspectives that are inside of our mind, that inform the choices we make in the world. And your particular gender, your particular ancestral background, the class or area of the nation that you grew up in, all of these things affect the filter of what is coming in and out of your mind. And so the more that we build a culture where each one of us introduces sort of the layers of who we are, the more we can begin to appreciate the diversity and the uniqueness and the individuality that is here. And in that appreciation, we can begin to find the overlap. We can begin to share with each other. And I believe we're living in this remarkable time of globalization where we are emerging towards a global. Ever going to do that successfully? We appreciate the magic and the truth and the beauty that lives in each person. And not take that which is not ours to take, but to be open to receive that which is given. Because when we look to nature, nature does not thrive in communities of sameness. When we grow crops, one fruit, one vegetable, all in a field, of those plants become available to disease and infection, that the life-sustaining systems that are provided by the others in the community are not there. And so like our current system of agriculture is depleting the soil, is making it so that we're losing the bees. We're losing a lot of nature because of the way that we are so dedicated to sameness. And yet in a forest, where all of the species and plants and animals and variety are supporting each other in this interconnected web, the soil becomes richer and more powerful. The trees have the ability to support each other from infection and give each other what is needed when another needs it. That forests, ecosystems thrive in diversity, and I believe that people do too. And so we're going to spend this whole month just digesting this a little more. And I want to invite you to pay attention to your e-news this week especially. I had the privilege a week and a half ago of interviewing a friend of mine, our Greater Centers for Spiritual Living community. Tracy Brown is a practitioner who lives in Dallas, Texas. And she is also a diversity and inclusion trainer in the corporate world and someone who's been a really big advocate and ally for Centers for Spiritual Living nationwide, worldwide really, becoming a more diverse and inclusive community. And Tracy Brown is a black woman, and we had a conversation a number of years ago about how as she gained her education in science of mind and she became a practitioner, one of the things that she noticed was all of the people she was being taught about, all of the history of this movement seemed to be all about white people. And she looked around and said, "Where are my people?" She said, "I know there's been black people somewhere in this movement in the last 100 years. Where are they?" And so she went on this life kind of passionate research project that she now calls The Hidden Legacy, which was her project of uncovering the history of the contributions of black people to New Thought. And I had a lovely opportunity to have a really deep, somewhat provocative conversation with Tracy Brown a week and a half ago that we recorded in a sort of an interview. I came to her saying, you know what? I have noticed that in my education as a minister, I'm taught that this philosophy comes from all over the world, and yet it seems like it came from a whole lot of rich white people. What's going on here? And so Tracy and I had a deep dialogue, about 52 minutes long, where she got to educate me a little bit about some of the folks I'd never heard of, and some of the history of the contributions of black people to the movement of New Thought. And so that's going to be in your e-news this coming week, and then Tracy Brown is also going to be creating a special presentation for us that we will show in our service next week. And then she will also be on the talk after the talk the following Wednesday to engage and answer questions if you're interested. So please check your e-news. There's many layers for us to talk about this idea of use and value diversity this month. And I just want to say thank you to Amy for educating us, for sharing with us. As we step into the Chinese Lunar New Year, and as Amy said, this is an agricultural day. This is the point where we start thinking about what seeds do you want to plant? Is your soil ready? What are your intentions for this next year? Because as our little friend told us on Groundhog's Day, we got 6 more weeks of winter. But after that, spring is coming. So my friends, take a deep breath and let go. I'm going to invite my ministers and practitioners to stand and just hold this space with me. And I invite you just to breathe. And as we breathe, let us remind ourselves of the one deepest truth that we proclaim in this place. That there is only one. That the universe is one, that life is one, that this thing that I call God, that each one of us may have a different name for, we may call it our higher self or consciousness or just love. Let us remember that there is one seamless presence that is living and breathing throughout the entirety of the universe, that has been for all of creation, throughout all of evolution, all of time, one life, one love, one being, one consciousness. It is the universe that is looking through our eyes. And each one of us has arisen from the body of the earth. Let us remember that there is only one of us here, and yet that one shows up as the rainbow of multiplicity and the beauty of diversity. That each one of us is an unreplicatable, unique, individualized expression of 14 billion years of possibility, choice, and chance. And that each one of us represents a unique lens through which the universe is seeking to express a new truth, a greater truth, a higher purpose. And so let us take it as our responsibility to acknowledge that which needs to be acknowledged in the sphere around us. Let us educate ourselves so that we can banish the ignorance that got us here and step into new possibilities, so that then we can be people who live in a new way, who see the beauty that surrounds us, so that we can serve, so that we can love, so that we can give, so that we can share and uplift each and every person on this planet to the level of spiritual magnificence. Because it is the light of God that is shining through each one of us. Let us value that truth and activate it everywhere we go. And so for all of this and so much more, I just say yes. And so it is.